We're back with another edition of the Federalist Radio Hour. I'm Emily Jashinsky, culture editor here at The Federalist. As always, you can email the show at radio@thefederalist.com. Follow us on Twitter at FDRLST. Make sure to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts as well. Right now, I'm joined by my colleague, senior editor Christopher Bedford. Chris, how is it going?
It's going great. Happy day. Happy afternoon to you.
Thank you, sir. Now, let's pick up on a thread that we talked about actually on an earlier podcast just a few days ago. We were talking about sort of the balance between Americans who have been sort of had this COVID-induced skepticism of government control and are sort of sick and tired of restrictions and regulations. But then it does seem that there's this other portion of the country that, because of COVID, is now sort of conditioned and but what's the word I'm looking for? Like demanding of more regulations. So when we're thinking about the end of social distancing possibly being upon us, or we see the light at the end of the tunnel, what do you actually make of that? I mean, do you think people are actually going to sort of, as they're vaccinated more and more, buck any lingering restrictions? Or do you think we're going to still have this friction between
these little Eichmanns, these little control freaks? I think will continue to be control freaks for sure. I mean, I got up really early on St. Patrick's Day so I could do a lot of work, do some TV, do some editing, do some writing, and then get to the pub where a man should be on St. Patrick's Day.
And then get drunk.
No, I was moderately served for 14 hours.
Right.
But coming home with a friend in that afternoon to switch up the venues, and I got out of the cab, took my mask off in the traffic island about a couple blocks from my house, and about 40 feet away, two streets away, because there's an intersection, this perfectly round, gray-haired woman on a bicycle who looks like a character from Alice in Wonderland meets like who I really have fond memories of, preschool teacher, Jed. She looks somewhere in between those two people, and she screeches, "Put on your effing mask!" I'd never been yelled at before. And I know a lot of people had, but I hadn't. I just looked at her. And I said, it's extremely dangerous to yell at strangers. And you don't know what kind of day I've had, or like what kind of person I am. Like, I could be crazy. And she just continued screeching, "Put on your effing mask. You're not 3. It's shocking. I don't think she's going to listen to anyone but Dr. Fauci, who, as Rand Paul was pointing out this week, is obsessed with the theater. He likes celebrity. He likes to wear the 2 masks, even though he's inoculated. It's incredibly, incredibly stupid. The kind of people who are like, put on a mask and you're on a Zoom call with them so they feel more comfortable, don't question the science people. But what's wild is these decisions, these completely arbitrary decisions by these people, these scientists, that we've been subject to have actually destroyed lives and like destroyed businesses. And I have friends who've lost their businesses. Whole industries, catering companies, for example, and event spaces are absolutely gone or decimated. At least only the major rich corporations might survive. All the small guys. A lot of restaurants. I have a very good friend who just opened a wonderful, beautiful restaurant. We interviewed him at the beginning of the pandemic, and it was a small table, kind of snug in, really good high-end food, oysters, chartreuse, and whiskey kind of bar, like an intimate setting. It's not a food court. You can't sit people 6 feet apart and make business. Now, the CDC's been saying 6 feet apart, which is, it's difficult to really understand exactly where that comes from. And now they're saying, well, in school, you can be 3 feet apart. And that's the new thing. And Fauci teased this earlier, like this is his new thing. Well, and then maybe he'll go back and forth on this again. But if you're looking at that, you can do that in school now. What do you say to all these restaurateurs, all these people? I mean, 3 feet apart is the average distance. 2 to 3 feet is the average distance of social space that is needed in Americans between friends, close friends and family. Now, you don't want to be like 3 feet or 2 feet apart from someone who's a perfect stranger all the time, unless you're in public transportation and you don't love it. But that's normal. Like to have a table that's 3 feet apart from someone else is completely normal. That doubles your capacity. That allows you on St. Patrick's Day to actually have people standing there. You can't have a bar or something. Now, I'm guessing that guys like Fauci are going to come out and say, hey, well, this is different. This is different because people take off their masks when they they're eating and they don't take off their masks in school. Maybe it's something like that. But they don't usually, unless you're like positively Roman, eat next to each other for 6.5 hours. That'd be really intense, probably really delicious time. But 6.5 hours, you don't have your mask off. You're sitting next to each other in school, and also these are children. I mean, don't get me wrong, kids should be back in school right now, but they are definitely going to try and expand this BS to be like, well, that doesn't apply to anyone else, and that's just ridiculous. And I think that's what we're in for.
Yeah, I agree. And I think, what that does is heighten the friction that has already, I think, grown over the course of the year between people who are saying, we're outdoors. I'm not going to put my mask on a hiking trail because somebody will be passing within 5 feet of me. And
gasping as they jog down my street. I'm like, take your mask off.
Yeah, well, yeah, and so it heightens the tension that already exists, and it's sort of going to continue, I think, heightening divisions. I guess my question for you is how long you think people like the woman who yelled at you on the street will cling to the rules of social distancing. Do you think that this is something where we have a majority of the population vaccinated and we still have maskers? Because right now, what we're being told, I guess I just don't see how this ever goes away, that if you are vaccinated, wear a mask. So why, when everybody is vaccinated, logically, by that logic, why is somebody going to take off the mask?
And you see a story in the Wall Street Journal. It said that, it was like a week or two ago, that said that the Americans don't want to take vaccines because of Russian disinformation telling them they're not effective or they're dangerous. And it's like, I know the Journal's got some really good people in its editorial department, but the reporting sometimes is lacking. And how freaking stupid do you have to be to honestly, seriously write that scoop, that headline, that there were three Russian magazines associated with Facebook that were infiltrating American consciousness, when you've got idiots like Dr. Fauci up there on television every day, smelling their own farts and booking their own experience, own interviews. They can spread, you have to wear a mask after the vaccine. When you have the president of the United States walking around after he's been vaccinated, wearing double masks. When you've got the vice president doing the same. These are the people who we follow more than Russian magazines no one's ever heard of with small followings. Those are the people who are doing this. And I think that these anti-vaxxers are going to cling to it. But not the anti-vaxxers, the new science truthers, the global warming type people, just like the fanatics. The same kind of people who would completely destroy our industry, hobble us and make China rule the world because global warming BS, are the exact same kind of people who will cling to this, which is a sizable part of the population. But I was really worried, like you were, about people not returning back to normal, ever. Mm-hmm. And here, it might not for a long time, but then it takes just a trip to a different state, or Northern Virginia is still pretty masky, but if you go to Central Virginia, absolutely not. Now, if you go to Southern Virginia, no freaking way. If you go to Florida, where I'm going for Easter, I might see some of the elderly wearing masks and those people who want to take precautions for their own personal lives, but most people will absolutely not be wearing them. Then no one will yell at you if you walk through a hotel lobby without one, unless you're maybe at a really corporate place. In certain parts of Florida, in the liberal parts, it's different. It's all cultural. And I've gone across the country now a few times during COVID, and there are whole states where they don't have it. And if they do have it, they don't care about it. They'll talk about it as much as they'll talk about the flu. Maybe it's flu season. That's it. There are whole bars where if you walk in, an old woman will give you a hug. They don't care at all. Those places will change, but some of the elite centers where the virtue signaling, where every one of my neighbors has these signs. I love my neighbors; they're great people, but a lot of them have signs with their politics on them in the garden. And those people who like to put their politics out front will probably often still wear their masks out front.
I'm wondering, when we have the return, which I know market forces will induce, of major festivals or packed airplanes, which we've seen some of over the course of the pandemic. Some of these Asian countries that are really scarred by their experiences with other outbreaks that they've seen in the past, people still wear masks regularly before the COVID pandemic.
Yeah, like in China.
Yeah.
Which is just an absolutely putrid, disease-ridden country where all of these plagues come from.
Do you see that happening here? Like, let's say a year from now, do you think people will be at, I'm thinking, so I'm from the Milwaukee area, Summerfest. Do you think people will be out at concerts in masks?
I think people will be out at concerts in Florida.
Mm-hmm.
I think that you will see the same thing you're seeing right now with spring break. I mean, I felt like it had been an entire year, and I didn't realize I'd miss it. Since I'd seen like an 18-year-old boy or girl in handcuffs escape the police on the beach at a full sprint. Like, and I was like, I didn't even realize I'd missed that.
It's an
I don't know
American
why,
tradition.
but I'm excited to see that. That's the normal American behavior. I don't know how he's going to get those cuffs off. I hope they're the plastic ones and not the metal ones. Holy smokes. But I saw that today in the news and thought, spring break shenanigans. 18-year-olds. They're back. So you're always going to have the tisk tisters. A friend of mine just sent my uncle to send me a video from Maine. And there's a ski resort up that he goes out to in Maine. And now Maine in the summertime is very poor. Maine in the wintertime near the ski areas can attract a nicer clientele. So they're going to have to cater to both. It's going to be a clash of cultures up there. And people are sitting at the bars again. I'm seeing that at certain bars in Capitol Hill, it coming back, people sitting at the bars. But I think that there will be that separation that like between people and those who virtue signal and those who judge and those who are simply like kind of afraid or broken, that will continue for a long time. You know, I tell you what, if there's another strain of this, if there's like a new strain and Dr. Fauci's in charge for another 3 years, I'm selling my house and moving. I'm leaving DC and moving to a free state. South Dakota, Florida, I don't know yet, but both of them are great.
Let's be honest, we don't even live in a state right now, let alone a free one.
Thank goodness.
In the District of Columbia.
Very anti-DC statehood.
Well, so
you need to learn how to have self-governance and a functioning middle class. It's like Iraq.
Yeah, okay. You just broached something that I want to bring up, which is that if we have further strains of this, you can sort of see people like Fauci latching onto them as a way. But why? You know,
why? He's a sex symbol. He's famous.
Right. But why would he then say, let's bring back some of these regulations? Like maybe you should wear a mask when you're in restaurants in this part of the country where we have another strain of COVID. What do you think of that? I mean, do you foresee that happening? And why on earth would people want to continue going along with that?
I think that you're going to see further and further and further rebellion, and there's nothing that's causing this rebellion more easily, even amongst the folks here who like will have in Fauci We Trust T-shirts, replacing God with Fauci. There, isn't that clever? The nice weather's bringing them out, so like people are still wearing the masks even here, which is the most paranoid city in America, and they're crowded into these spaces so they can go and get champagne and they can go and get their mimosas and so they can go out to eat. Like it's coming back and it's just part of that nice weather and that summer weather. And people are going to want to get itchy and they're going to want to get on the road. And Fauci's going to learn, I think, that you can't be famous forever, especially finally, I love Rand Paul versus Dr. Fauci because Rand and a couple other Republican senators have been quietly fighting with Fauci in the hallways. I mean, Ben Sass got into an argument with Fauci in the hallways, but it wasn't publicized. He wasn't trying to publicize it. I just know about it. If you have Republicans starting to come out and say, you know what, I get like the population does not turn on me, and my voters do not turn on me by saying, you pompous windbag, you are done ruling us. I think we'll start to see more and more and more high-level pushback to this. Like the Democrats have always treated COVID pretty partisanly as a weapon to destroy their cities and unelect Donald Trump. Republicans have so far kept away from trying to do that, at least as far as I can say. People might disagree. Some of them, maybe DeSantis, other people say, no, we're not locking down. If you want to politicize that, sure, but that's personal freedom. We'll start to see more of that. And that combined with the weather is just going to make a huge difference. But we had early warning signs about Fauci. Even when I thought, when he was working for Trump in the first few weeks, I thought, this guy seems reliable. He's interesting. He's an AIDS doctor. He's tracked pandemics. Turned out that's all completely exaggerated.
You were like, this guy seems sexy.
This guy's sexy. You know, he's
get a candle of
this a little, but he's got swagger. My friend of mine in the White House was flipping out, saying, I hate him. I'm like, why? He goes, all he does is book TV appointments. All he does, he's constantly asking us, get him on TV more, get him on TV more. He's on stations I've never heard of. My friend used to run campaigns in small states all over the country. Look at there, he's on stations and magazines. He's talking to newspapers and blogs I've never heard of. He's obsessed with being in the press. And I just used to make fun of him about that. Within a few weeks, I realized, like, you're completely right. This guy is obsessed with seeing himself on television. He likes that power, but I don't think he's no longer someone who can't be touched. He's no longer the anti-Trump. He's no longer the symbol of resistance in the administration. Now he's just a doctor who's probably going to begin to butt heads more and more with Biden administration as they want to reopen schools because it's just becoming really politically unfeasible to keep them shut. They're going to butt heads more and more, and I think his star will fade with that.
Our broken culture exacerbated a lot of the problems related to the pandemic. It made it much worse because there was politicization that led to bad decisions. There's politicization that led to decisions, if you look of what happened in New York with Andrew Cuomo, that were enormously costly. How do you think this exacerbates some of those broken elements of our culture that contributed to the exacerbation of the pandemic? So that's to say, how has this made some of our problems worse? And has it made any of them better? The one I'm thinking about at the top of my head is the dissolution of community and of civic centers. And so when you have a pandemic that keeps everybody separated and distanced for a year and further breaks down those institutions so that they can't even function and operate, people can't come together, period. I mean, what do you think this does?
There are some aspects that have grown stronger with this, like family, and people being close together and people being around each other. The amount of people, for all the sad stories that we've heard and all the losses and friends who've lost family and everything else, the amount of people I know who got to spend the first year of their children's lives with them, helping their wives out, or husband and wife being all together in the same roof, it's pretty incredible, that aspect. Three things have been absolutely crushed. Like what you said, the sense of community. I mean, we were abandoned by our church leaders, the archbishops and the bishops of the United States, the people who are supposed to be the shepherds who keep out the wolves, actually just let them right in and said, have at it. The church is closed. That's like go to hell activity in levels of cowardice. I can't judge them obviously, but the final judgment, but it's a really bad choice they made. And they left a lot of people alone and afraid, as if they weren't essential frontline workers to deal with our souls. The whole thing that began, that complete BS, that is, we're all in this together, which is a complete lie, has been from the beginning. I don't feel like we're all in this together. We're screaming at each other. We're informing on each other. We're out in the street. Put on your effing mask. It's not like, at first, yeah, how can I get food to my neighbor? How can I make sure everyone's good? How can I stocked up extra to take care of people if they needed it, and coordinating with friends and warning each other. But it quickly became, like around here in different areas of DC, informants and people who are willing to rat on you and to tell on you and to say that they're better than you and to go after your priests and to go after anyone. I mean, and that's a really bad thing for society, to have that level of suspicion and anger at each other. And I'm the new police officer around here. And by the way, the police don't bug you because they're usually pretty normal people. That's been really dangerous. And the small businesses and the sports teams, like the small businessman makes the Main Street, makes our community. They fund the sport teams. They're the ones that you go to when you take a date night out. You don't take, sometimes depending on what town you live in, you might go to a chain or something, but typically you'll go to a place that's special to you guys, a date night or anniversary or wherever. Those are the local community leaders that pay the taxes, that are involved in the PTA and everything. And how many of those guys were bankrupted? And by the way, how many owners of like Chili's were fine? And I like Chili's.
You like Chili's?
It's great. I love the sizzle, but the major corporations got theirs. I mean, they're gonna be okay. Amazon's doing great. They're doing fine. So corporations get stronger, businesses get weaker, communities get weaker, church leaders abandon us, and neighbors start informing on each other. I no longer feel like we're all in this together. I think that was kind of a Bank of America or whoever it was, like Wells Fargo slogan. And it was, I'm trying so hard not to curse. It was BS.
Yeah. Well, no, this actually is another sort of perfect case study, which is that when you look at the corporations who were telling us we're all in this together, it's amazing.
Seeing it on windows, like spelled out in the window lights at night.
Yeah, yeah.
Are we?
Yeah, are we? So, but this is another good point in that we have, I think, right now, a class of billionaires and multimillionaires that lacks the sort of shared sense of values with the rest of the public that used to exist even between the ultra wealthy and the middle class. And I don't think we have that anymore in the way that we used to. And I think that's, sort of a product of our, postmodern culture, and that's sort of a deeper rabbit hole to go down, but it's another element of something that was exacerbated and accelerated by the pandemic, because you had people like Jeff Bezos earning, like, his net worth going up by billions and billions and billions, tens of billions, and you had not a lot of that going to the people who worked at Amazon that weren't able to make a living on Zoom. That weren't able to sort of kick back and put on a nice shirt with pajama pants and enjoy the lockdown, working from home.
I never did that.
Well, that's not true.
Men should wear shoes when they leave their bedroom and pants with a belt.
Even when there isn't a pandemic, you'll see Chris business on top, party on the bottom with like.
In the summertime, you'll see me in shorts and boat shoes on the bottom, but those are pants.
Yeah. Yeah,
no, a friend of mine called me the other day, and he has like the classic kind of libertarian, old-fashioned Republican corporate kind of background, like pedigree. I mean, libertarian courses and fellowships when he was younger, and doing all those kind of jobs and consulting and this and that, and then going into private business consulting, business school, masters, and all that stuff. Coming up through this, he's like the classic, keep my taxes low and I don't care about the rest of the stuff kind of guy. He called me the other day after Liz Warren floated the $10 million wealth tax, like wealth taxes on people who make 10 million or have 10 million and then over it. And he said, tell me what's wrong with this. And I was just kind of battering things around in my head. I'm like, I don't know. The money's already been taxed. It's a tax and responsibility. It'll probably hit small businesses harder, like people who own ranches and things like that. And family businesses, corporations will be fine and shield their money. Those are some of the things that come off at first on it. And those kind of people are certainly different. A lot of the small businesses kind of operate in that level, even though they don't have that money on hand, for sure. They have those assets on hand. And he pointed out, it's like, our aristocracies failed us. Like, we don't have an aristocracy. The whole point to like a British aristocracy or a French aristocracy back in the day, and why they eventually got discarded in France and not in England, is because they stood for England. And they stood for literature and learning and patronage and the arts and the music, and like they helped define the culture. They felt it was like the ward of theirs. I mean, people like Winston Churchill, who was not born poor, joined cavalry and charged enemy fire because that's what you freaking did. Now, of course, the enlisted men might have a different opinion of some of those officers in their fancy clothes with their ties on. But they were charging the enemy, and they were serving England, and they were doing what's right. They had a very great sense of duty and love and patriotism. We don't have that. And he's like, in fact, as Tucker's pointed out repeatedly, we have the only weird class war that's like the rich are trying to destroy or rebelling against the poor in our country. The powerful, the elites are rebelling against the voiceless in our country and just trying to hurt them every day, from CNN and MSNBC and the New York Times and Harvard University. Like, they have scorn for them and hate them. Our rich have no connection to us. Our ultra rich, the Jeff Bezos and the types like that, the Zuckerbergs, they consider themselves citizens of the world. They don't consider their companies American. They think that our values are horrible. They don't think that all lives matter. They think that they're so disconnected. And you know what? I kind of hate them, and I don't really care if Liz Warren wants to take their money to pay for bridges, like, at all. And I'm just starting to wonder, at what point do these tech companies and these billionaires and these people who have always counted on the folks who work paycheck to paycheck across the country the Republican base, the conservatives, the farmers, the hard workers, having no grudge against their success ever. We don't begrudge success. And defending them against liberals and Democrats who just want to take it and divvy it up amongst their special interest groups, saying, no, you can't do that. It's America. But then all those rich people and tech companies turn around and attack Christians and use their influence, like Michael Bloomberg, to go fly a jet down and brag about shutting down a coal mine in West Virginia, and then fly home to New York City, leaving behind hundreds of destitute families and children and alcoholism and drug addiction and no school money. Like, good job, Michael Bloomberg. How long are they going to do that before the people who have said don't take everything from them just say, I don't care, I don't give a shit? Like, you guys, torch mob, Bezos lives around the corner.
But Bezos,
the guy doesn't. It's like we talked about in the last podcast we wrote together. We're at that really dangerous point in society where there are those who want to tear it down, who are alienated from it. The Antifas, the BLMs, and then there are those who are law-abiding and civil and quiet and patriotic, who don't feel like it's protected or serving their interests or even on their side, who also become alienated from it. And at that point, who the heck's on the side of the system and the state? Like, it's a dangerous, dangerous place to be.
We haven't even talked about how this will shape future generations. I mean, children who are in their formative years in the middle of a pandemic that's now still in a year of their life and continues to roll on and will probably take up more than that. And, it's probably good that we haven't talked about that because it's such an unknown. We don't know how it's changed them and changed the world. And that's really scary. But to your point, this brings it back to our central question. Will social distancing ever die? Well, people like Jeff Bezos have gotten a lot richer. People like Mark Zuckerberg have gotten richer. I mean, these are the tech giants. The pandemic has been great for them. It's been great for them because we're now more reliant on the technology. So in a sense, we'll never be back to where we were before the pandemic because a huge portion of the workforce is never going to go back to 5 days a week in the office. And maybe that's good for some people, but the social distancing will never technically ever really die because now so many things have been normalized in the virtual space. And we have virtual mechanisms to accomplish so many tasks that used to be basic, in-person activities. I mean, I know we're wrapping up here, but I just last night watched the last Blockbuster on Netflix. And it makes you think about the experience of like literally going to a Blockbuster, physically deciding which movie to rent, and then bringing that home, a physical copy of it. It changes.
How exciting was that? Like, how much fun was that?
It changes the way. It changes the way.
You and your brothers and sisters and your parents had to like choose the movie together. Because there was one TV. You weren't all going off on your own screens to watch your own thing at your own time.
And if you didn't like that movie, you sat through it and you didn't turn it off and find another one. And
or you went to your room.
Right. Or yeah, exactly. And you read a book.
Play outside.
Right. And it really makes me think, about some of those experiences that are just never coming back. And I don't know that that's for the better. I mean, cinema as an art, when you're able to hold it in your hand physically, it's just so different than when it's another thumbnail in a sea of thumbnails.
Yeah, I agree. And you never even knew when you're going to Blockbuster, are they going to have the movie that I want? Maybe they don't. I mean, it's really frustrating right now if I can't point and click and find a movie in one of the streaming services.
Right. So we're never going to be normal, and that's abundantly obvious.
You lose it. You lose that entirely. That comes with so many just forgotten things. And people say, it's no big deal. It's no big deal. It's no big deal. And it's kind of like the same thing we had with the masks. And no, you just can't see half of the person's face. No one can smile or frown or show any expression. We're all just eyeballs. It's just women in burqas, basically, like the things that we used to say we don't want as a Christian people on us. Everyone has to wear them now, and that's what kids see. It's like, oh, that's great. I can't even see your face. I have no idea, no idea what you look like. No idea if you're I walk by people at the airport, and I want to smile at them, but I just look at them. They might think that I'm a psychopath, like just glaring at them. In fact, there was just like a friendly smile as I walked by.
Yeah, I would think you're a psychopath.
Well, yeah, I mean, I behave at airports. I've seen enough things. These little things that go away, these blockbusters, these facial expressions, which I think is actually a pretty major thing, that go away over time. This is bad, and the pandemic has hurt it dramatically. I mean, the things that I'm so enheartened by Florida, more than by Texas, more than by anywhere else. And, South Dakota remained free the entire time, but South Dakota is just not quite as busy as Florida is all the time. It's a less populated state. But being down there and seeing live music in the streets, crowded dinner rooms, people sitting at bars, and old people wearing masks, like I said, people dancing, and children sitting on Santa Claus's lap at Christmas. Like, seeing that was like, okay, it's been a whole year. No one ever thought we'd be able to touch a stranger again. And there are thousands and thousands of parents here tonight throughout the course of this month who are going to be bringing their kid to sit on Santa Claus's lap. Like, that made me think, like, maybe not everyone's completely stupid. Maybe not everyone's completely broken. And things will go back. Like, I mean, I can't imagine, considering what we've gone through in this past year, what it actually must have been like to go through, like, a real plague. Like, one that actually had bodies in the streets and killing people, and, like, didn't just, like, kill the super fat, the super old, or the super unlucky. Or, like, people who are on respirators, as we saw earlier on. I know it's bigger than that, but it's not the Black Plague. Like, what must have felt like in Europe, where at the end of this thing, like, a third of your population or fifth of your population is decimated. The churches are empty. There are no more priests. All the men are dead. Like, cities have fallen. And you have to, and eventually they got back to, like, dancing bears in the street and carnivals and, attacking people again. Like, things got back to normal for the Europeans. I figure that with time, a lot of things hopefully will start to return. But that trust, that thing we were talking about earlier, the neighborhood trust, and finding out, like, where we stand and what our neighbors think of us, people screaming at children in supermarkets and stuff, ejecting disabled children from stores because they don't have a mask on. Like, that kind of stupidity hopefully goes away, but I worry that it might be here a little longer.
Preventing Chris Bedford from sitting on Santa's lap. It was just a horrible thing. You went there, you were so excited. You went to the mall, you had your Christmas outfit.
I think I'll have to pass myself, but for the little ones, I was so excited to sit on Santa's lap. And then I was arrested.
Yeah, and I called you in.
You bailed me. You got me bail. Thank you.
So what Chris just touched on, I think, is something that I remember Molly Hemingway and I talked about on a podcast just as the pandemic started and lockdown started last year, which is that, hopefully the silver lining to all of this is that we remember what we've lost and that it creates demand for some of maybe the simpler things that we did before the virtual era, because we are all Zoom fatigued and, well, I guess not all of us, but we're sick of this, and we're sick of how the government has acted. We're sick of how tech has acted. And hopefully the silver lining is that it creates demand for people to sort of revisit a simpler time, perhaps. But that's a conversation we'll continue on another podcast. Chris, thanks so much for your time today.
I think this was great, Emily, and to see if this is the episode that gets us canceled.
Yeah, we'll see. Well, you've been listening to another edition of the Federalist Radio Hour. I'm Emily Jashinsky, culture editor here at the Federalist, joined today by my colleague, Christopher Bedford, senior editor at the Federalist. We will be back soon with more. Until then, be lovers of freedom and anxious for the fray.